Think we're live.
There we go.
All right, I'm here with Katie Esch. And Katie, why don't you tell me a little bit about your backstory? We just had a conversation before recording and kind of tell me how you started this journey and the story of your daughter, Violet.
So it all started, like I said, with my daughter Violet. She had a lot of sensory differences, and we were coming up on the pandemic. Right before the pandemic, we had her kind of 18-month well child, and they said, well, she may be on the autism spectrum, but we don't really have resources for that until she's 5. And meanwhile, she was wearing her clothes inside out because she didn't like the seams. She was really unable to bathe. She had a very limited diet. And as we came up on the pandemic, resources were harder to find. Um, and so, you know, as a mom and a stylist of 13 years, I'm like, I should be able to brush her hair, right? Like I should be able to brush my kid's hair, of course. Um, and so I just started kind of diving in and doing more research and trying to figure out the whys behind the behaviors. And shortly after that, we were lucky enough to get in touch with some really great occupational therapists. Shout out to Children's Therapy Corner. Woo woo.
Where are they at?
Um, they are located right here in Lansing off of Jolly Road.
Okay.
Um, and so, and they shared with us a lot of information pretty much after every appointment. I would leave with like a little stack of papers, which I loved reading, and started just applying that to my life with my daughter and why, and kind of really working through her sensory challenges from there. And then from that, just started sort of a word of mouth. If you had a child or a loved one you were taking care of that really struggled with a salon experience, a lot of people would say, oh, well, kind of point them towards Katie, point them towards Katie. And so at a certain point, I decided, there are so many people that are struggling. And I would see on Facebook all the time, right? Where can I get my child's haircut? Or my teenager's never been able to actually have a haircut in a salon. Um, and so I started kind of diving into um, how to figure out how to get the information out to families about who could cut their hair, and B, really make sure that stylists that wanted to offer these services and had the heart to really reach out to this community had the proper training to really wrap their minds around the whys and understand and kind of be able to meet people where they're at.
So when you talk about training, how does that look? So let's say um, I wanted to reach out to you and say, like, hey, I'd really love to talk to you about, training. Are you running those? Do you have other people? What does that look like for somebody that would be interested in that?
Yeah, so someone could reach out to me. I have We have had our first big training a couple of weeks ago, and I partnered with the Mid Michigan Autism Association. They were really gracious to provide sensory kits to all
Yep.
of the stylists that attended, which was amazing. Um, and then basically, if somebody wanted education in their salon, we could come to them, or once or twice a year, we're hoping to maybe do like a quarterly sort of collaboration in class, and kind of refresh ideas. Oh, there's always new information coming out. Sign up for one of those classes. And what one of those classes really looks like is kind of cover whoever I'm partnering with, right? I'm hoping to partner in the future with more um, autism and disability groups around the state, kind of cover what autism and neurodiversity is and isn't, and the language that we would use around that,
Sure.
and
Yeah.
sort of cover the nitty gritty of that. And then from there, I sort of take over and go through my story, and then kind of dive into why a haircut is a sensory Olympics, right? That's what I say. It's like it's a sensory Olympics. It's super rewarding at the end, but there's so much to go through to get there. So kind of covering, we all know the five senses, but there's so much more to that. The proprioception and our vestibular system and olfactory senses, and sort of why that may cause certain behaviors, and understanding the framework around like fight or flight and how to introduce things to a client. Um, and then we sort of chat. I feel like everyone I talk to at some point knows someone, or they themselves are neurodivergent, and so they have kind of tips and tricks, and just kind of bouncing off each other. And networking is a big piece of it too. Um, just because I offer these services, I've had families that I've pointed in the direction of another stylist, and they were a better fit. Just it's so interpersonal that if we can have a network of people who are able to provide these services, we can kind of refer to each other, and bounce ideas off of each other, and kind of really build the community and have the proper science-based education behind what we're doing.
Yeah, I think getting connected with Kathy over at Mid Michigan Autism, um, she'll probably help you out greatly. Like she is so much energy and like loves helping out people. We know Kathy very well, so I think that'll be a great resource for you.
She's been
Um,
awesome.
yeah, yeah, she's great. Um, so how do you see this network like developing? Are you thinking like creating a website somewhere that has, or some type of tech, or um how do you envision this growing? And like, is there going to be like a hub that people can go to that are like, all right, well, I'm looking for, maybe a manicure or a pedicure. There's like a filter. Like, what does that look like for you going forward? I know it's early, so but what's your like vision on that?
So my big vision would be, yes, a website. Um, but just beyond that, right now, I have a Facebook page, a very small Facebook page. Um,
What is it called?
and it is called Haircuts Are for Everyone.
Okay.
Um, and so that's kind of like my goal is, people I've heard so many times, people like, oh, well, we don't do haircuts or because of this or that. And it's like, no, haircuts and hygiene, that's for everyone. That's a human thing.
Yeah.
And so you don't feel like, oh, that isn't for us or that is for us. There is a way, and there are resources, and so that's the name. Haircuts Are for Everyone. I would like to have a website, but for right now, I've kind of everyone who's come to the training, I've asked that when they post stuff, they just hashtag Haircuts Are for Everyone, to kind of people can click on that, people can search that, and hopefully then start to just see like lists right on social media. Even if you Googled that, right, all these things would pop up. Um, and hopefully be able to find someone near them. In the future, I would like to be able to travel kind of statewide, do maybe Traverse City in different areas. There's so much need, and be able to reach out to all these different communities, and sort of then build up that Facebook presence and that social media presence in general, because that's such a great way to reach people and find resources. And then, as you mentioned, a website, and kind of partner with the different um, autism and disability networks around the state,
Yeah.
to be added to their resource list, just to have as many fingers out into the community as possible, so that um, families can find us.
Yeah. I almost like think of it as, I mean, there's so many organizations that are like they'll come in and certify like an autism certified business, or like there's all these different companies that do that kind of stuff. But you have a very interesting niche here. It's not really coming into the workplace to certify the office. It's like an autism certified like training for stylists. I don't know if anybody's doing that. That's like you could almost have really two ways this business goes. It's the network, and then it's also like going out and training people. I mean, there's probably a massive need for that. I mean, I don't know of anybody that does that. I mean, you could have almost unlimited training sessions going on if this is something you really dove into.
Yeah, well, that's kind of what I've thought about. Like, okay, and then I thought about you know people people mention, I know Kathy said the two things she hears the most that people really need resources for are dentists and hairstylists.
Yep.
And so I would be happy to go into salons and train their entire staff. That's like a dream come true to be like an educator and go and do this. And then also even office staff in dentist office, people that are just generally providing services because that's so interpersonal, it's so one-on-one, and just be able to, like I said, touch on that sensory profile that we don't really learn. We learn about the five senses. We don't really learn about the other sensory profile. I think it'd be really cool to be able to, I mean, just service providers in general, be able to go and talk about my experience and train people. That's yeah, that's sort of like big picture dream goal is to have all of those things. Um,
What are what are you don't have to go through like everything because this would take too long, but like I'm thinking when you do a training, what are some of the key things that you touch on when you're training somebody? Like I mean, maybe like two or three type of things that kind of stand out the most that you're really focused on, teaching when you're doing these classes.
one is really being able to meet people where they are, right? Um, you can There's like the saying, like, you've met one person with autism. Cool, you've met one person with autism. And so it's kind of like just having that open framework. I think as stylists, there are state standards and there are just service things that we learn to do. And I think being able to take a step back from that stylist mind and really meet someone where they are is probably maybe the most important thing that I talk about is, um, we're stereotypically like loud and friendly and goofy, hairstylist
Yeah.
things. And you're taking a step back and greeting somebody calmly and maybe even sending them a text message ahead of time, to really bridge that gap and ask if there's anything in particular that they or the loved one that they're bringing in, um, would, maybe loud music would be really great. Some people really love that stimulation and maybe it wouldn't be so great. Um, so just being very open-minded. And then second, like I said, talking about the sensory pieces, we really, we ask people, okay, tilt your head down, do this. And that again is so second nature to us, um, but can be very challenging. And so being very mindful and intentional about what we are having someone do during their haircut, um, the language that we're using, and the communication style, right? It's very different for me to say, okay, come on over here and we'll shampoo your hair, versus me saying, I'll have you stand up and follow me over to the shampoo bowl so that we can rinse the color out of your hair.
Yeah.
Um, there's that communication piece as well. I feel like so those three things are kind of being open minded and meeting people where they're at, being aware of the sensory input, and being aware of your communication.
Awesome. Um, why don't you tell me a little bit more about your family if you're okay doing that? You said you have a 2-year-old, so you've got a son there too, and so why don't you just give me a little bit of family family story?
Sure, yeah. So my husband and I met in 2016,
What's his
and we
name?
got married about a year after that.
Okay.
So um, he is a plumber,
Okay.
and recently, around the same time as I started kind of like my journey, our family journey with our daughter, he went back to school right before the pandemic hit to become a plumber. So we've been doing school and all sorts of things. And then my son just turned 3,
What's your husband's name?
Lee.
Lee. Okay.
Yep, and the same last name. Um, and our family, we we have like learned to laugh about a lot of stuff. It's funny. Um, there are things like we'll be out in public, and I feel like, um, anybody who has like a neurodivergent household, I feel like you kind of get these like the samey things. You'll see like a kid on the floor in a grocery store, and like to us, we're like, oh man, and we can kind of like smile about it. And it's just really changed like the face of our family. We've become more like behavior centric. I feel like this generation of parents, I feel like it's kind of doing that in general, kind of
Sure.
looking at like the reasons why behaviors and things. But it's just kind of really formed our family, and I feel like it's made us kind of kinder, better parents together. But we live in Mason, and it's really great. I live on the same block as my salon, which is Hair and Company, and so
Are you downtown or are you downtown one? There's 2 locations, right? So you got downtown and then you've got the one, do they call it on Ash? But they're both on
yes,
Ash. So
but
like
they're both on Ash. Yeah, that's what's confusing. Well, and then if you put 700 in Google, but you don't put 700 West, you end up at the far or the fair office.
yeah.
So people will be like, "I'm at the fair," and I'm like, "Oh man, no." So yeah, I'm at the one near the Harvey Center. That's kind of outside of town
Yep. Yep.
a
What
little bit.
I didn't catch your son's name. What was his name?
Nolan.
Nolan. Okay. Cool.
Yep.
Um, anything that you wanna toss in there before we break? Anything that we missed?
Um, I think like the other, maybe the last thing, and this is the end of sort of my like presentation, if you will, at a training is um like of course this is so important because all people really, like I said, need a haircut. It's like a human hygiene thing. But also because as a mom of a neurodivergent kiddo, and it's gotten better, right? Things get better, but um, especially coming out of the pandemic, we would go to parks, and my daughter has, her hair unbrushed, and maybe her clothes are on inside out, and it was really, really hard for us to make friends, right? It was really, really hard for us to find people that, like I said, would meet us where we were at and kind of, if she was having a meltdown about something, that they would just kind of, keep everybody keeps on trucking, and it isn't such a big deal. And so um I think one of the most important pieces is that um we find like places in society, right? A haircut is one thing, but the mental health aspect of people with disabilities, they're diagnosed at a much higher rate, right, than neurotypical people are with anxiety, depression, etc. And so I think really what we do when we are meeting people where they are and providing these services is we're also creating niche places in society where they can just be who they are. And that goes so much further than a haircut, right? That's being accepted and that's belonging. Brene Brown kind of talks about like fitting in is one thing because you're changing who you are, right? But belonging is just being who you are and being accepted there and being comfortable. And so giving people that belonging, that they can come into a space, be who they are, need whatever accommodations they need, and be met, exactly where they're at and given exactly what they need. Um, that I think is such a missing piece to society and such a missing piece to the mental health puzzle. Um, that even though it's just a haircut, it's so much more than that. And if we can give, families sort of this reprieve from feeling the judgment of society, I think it'll go so much further than that.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thanks so much for jumping on. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate you reaching out. I like I